Patten.
Thank you, Deputy President, and I'm very pleased to speak on Mr Quilty's motion. And I have to say, for a man who's normally brief, this is not the most briefest of motions, and it almost speaks for itself in the facts that it lays out within the motion, and really paints a very sad picture, particularly of the Victorian Police. And this is a picture that was painted by the Victorian Police themselves. So this was a survey of the police, and it's their concerns, and I think it's those concerns that I'd probably like to focus on today. But we know, and the previous speakers, and I think that's what Mr Finn was saying, that corruption is dangerous. It corrodes our fabric of society, and it undermines political institutions and political systems. And we've certainly seen the undermining of trust. We know that by all trust barometers, by all tests of trust, Australia is declining, and our communities just don't trust the structures and the institutions that are here to ensure a safe community, a safe, strong community that protects our human rights. But when corruption affects our police force and then they fail to act in the public interest, I mean, that's when we're facilitating human rights abuses and obviously opening the door to organised crime. Because our police have very distinctive powers over us and over the community, and quite rightly. They can arrest, they can detain, they can search, and they can use force against individuals. They are powers that cannot afford to be abused. While the majority, and I grew up with Kenny Koala. I grew up, in the age where if something went wrong, you went and asked a policeman. You went and spoke to a policeman. It was seen. Just for the Chamber's information, Kenny Koala was a police officer who was in the form of a puppet who used to come to our school with an actual police officer, and was there to, I guess, inform children and ensure that we had faith and trust in our police force. And I think sadly, while the Victorian Police does a brilliant job in serving our community, in protecting us, I feel like that trust is not as strong as it should. And this means that when police officers do the wrong thing, they are held to account. And I think that's one of the reasons why our trust in our police forces has declined, because we no longer have that faith that when someone does the wrong thing, that they will be brought to task on it. On a world scale, we still are doing okay. We're considered the 12th least corrupt country. I'm not sure being in the top 12 is anything to kind of congratulate ourselves about. But we're slipping, and as the motion mentions, we are slipping further, and we have slipped significantly over the last 8 years. From a policing perspective specifically, there are real cracks, and there are cracks that we have not been able to, nothing to see here, wallpaper over. It is impossible to do that, and certainly this motion raises that. I mean, when nearly 10% of Victorian police think that there's corruption in the Victorian police, we have a problem. And they're prepared to say it in a survey. That is startling, and that is incredibly concerning. And then obviously when you combine that with the Lawyer X Royal Commission, and with every day the front pages rolling out the corruption, the lies that are coming out of our Victorian police force, no wonder our society and our community is losing faith in their police officer. They're losing faith that the police officer will act appropriately, will act honestly, and is honestly there to help, which I know that they are there to help. But these horror stories of brutality, police fudging breath tests, the misuse of the LEAP police database. It's clear that the current integrity structures within the police have failed us and have failed them. So I support this motion because I do think that we need to make urgent change. And as Mr Quilty made in his, mentioned in his contribution, there are templates for this. There's North Ireland, there's Canadian models. And in fact, there are models that have been recommended here. In the last term of government, the anti-corruption, the committee, the Integrity Committee, inquired into the external oversight and investigation of police corruption and misconduct in Victoria. That was just in 2018. Now, this was a bipartisan report, and it made 69 significant recommendations to improve transparency, impartiality, effectiveness and efficiency of the system. They determined that serious police misconduct could not be left to the police to investigate, and that probes should instead be conducted by Victoria's corruption watchdog, that is, the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, IBAC. In fact, recommendation 2 of that report states IBAC should formally establish a dedicated police corruption and misconduct division to increase public confidence in Victoria's system for the handling of complaints about police corruption and other misconduct, improve its capacity to conduct effective investigations, enhance its independence, develop its expertise and improve its overall performance. This division should consolidate IBAC's legislated functions that relate to complaints and disclosures about police corruption and other misconduct in Victoria. Unfortunately, that report was tabled in September 2018, so the government never had the opportunity to respond to it before entering into caretaker mode. I raised this recommendation last year with the Special Minister of State in this House, and the response from the Minister was that the government is currently considering recommendations directed to it in the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission. That was in May 2019. So a year on, we are still speaking about it. IBAC investigates about 2% of the allegations that it determines warrant investigation. They refer the remainder back to the police. And the police investigate about 10% of the complaints that they receive. The rest, and that's the Professional Standards Command, investigates about 10% of those complaints. The rest are just sent back to the station. You deal with it. I don't know if other people are aware, but a couple of years ago there was a police shooting at the Inflation nightclub in King Street. There is a man who now will spend the rest of his life with a colostomy bag. There is a woman who now has a third of her thigh because of that shooting. A police shooting of 2 innocent people in a nightclub. Guess what? Never been investigated. Police have not done their own internal investigation on a police shooting of 2 people, of which they have had to pay millions of dollars of compensation because of that. But they have not investigated that. The reality is that if police complaints are investigated at all, they're investigated by the police themselves. That is not suitable. That is an impossible situation that gives the community no confidence. I note Mr Grimley had great confidence, but I can tell you the Reason Party does not have confidence in police investigating police. In fact, I believe that going from the motion, the police don't have confidence in the police investigating themselves. And certainly when I have spoken to police officers off the record, they would say exactly the same thing. They fear making a report about corruption because they fear that it will go back to the person that they made the report about, because there is no one independent for them to speak to. You know, it's an inherent conflict of interest. It's mates looking after mates. And it's not good enough. And it's certainly not good enough in the year 2020. Justice not only needs to be done, but it needs to be seen to be done. And we need institutional change to achieve that. So I thoroughly support this motion. I implore the government to implement the recommendations of the 2018 IBAC committee inquiry. I think the minister was actually on that inquiry. The other minister. Yeah. And I commend the motion. And in finishing up, I also just hope that we are not raising this issue again in 2021. So we've raised it in 2018, recommendations were made. 2019, the government says they're onto it. 2020, nothing has happened, and let's hope that something happens this year.